particularly in the last 5 years, it's so debilitating to the American project because it teaches class hate, it teaches Marxism, it teaches this woke ideology. And what I view really is the good work under 19th Congress and working with the current presidential administration is really trying to root out as much of this woke ideology as possible. In the last decade, they started these crazy diversity statements where you had to promise as part of just getting a job that you were going to advance this woke ideology. And it really has spread all through academia. And so currently with Congress, a lot of what we've been looking at is how that's impacted anti-Semitism. Universities, get back to basics, focus on the core values of what the job market wants and what traditionally universities have provided to American society. And I think we're making some real progress.
Welcome to the Contrarian. I'm David Bernstein. In a world filled with noise, I'm here to provide the signal. Hello, this is David Bernstein, host of the Contrarian podcast. I'm delighted to be here today with, first of all, sometimes co-host Cliff Smith, who's the Director of Government Affairs at the North American Values Institute, and my cherished colleague. And we have a very special guest today, Congressman Michael Baumgartner, who is the Congressman of the 5th District of Washington. Welcome, Congressman.
Thanks, guys. It's great to be on. Appreciate the invitation.
Sure. Now, whenever I hear Washington, the state of Washington, my brain immediately goes to something very left wing, and here you are, a Republican member of Congress representing a district. Tell us a little bit about the political demographics and why you're here representing your district.
Well, I come from Eastern Washington. We call it Free Washington sometimes, but no, it's a wonderful district. It's a very large district, stretches for all the way from Canada in the north down to Oregon in the south, right up against the Idaho border. So we have a lot of mountains and wheat fields. We also have the second largest city in the state of Washington, which is called Spokane, and we have a large Air Force base. And I grew up in Eastern Washington. My father was a professor of forestry at Washington State University. Even though I spent a lot of time in the Middle East, it's great to be back home representing the good people. And if every district was like the 5th Congressional District of Washington State, we'd have a lot better a better country than we do right now. But no, it's real fun. What's interesting about the demographics district politically is it's rated about an R+8 district if you follow how political categorizations go. So Donald Trump won my district by about 8%. I actually won the district by about 21%. So had a good political performance in our first run for office.
Yeah, well, glad to see you in Congress. I know you had also a distinguished career in the Foreign Service. You said you spent some time in the Middle East, and I'm sure that'll play into the conversation as well. I think we're going to start sort of meta here, which is not Facebook, but, meta in the sense that, we're facing interesting ideological times, and our organization, North American Values Institute, is primarily concerned with sort of the ideological assault on the left on sort of core American values, Western Enlightenment values. We see this play out in education, both higher education and K through 12 education. I'm sure that plays out in the politics of your district, Congressman. Tell us a little bit about what you're seeing and feeling out there, and how it plays into your role as a member of Congress.
Well, thank you, and I really appreciate the good work that your institution does. And I think at this point in American history, there's kind of two paradigms about America, and it can be kind of summed up. Do you view America as a 1776 project, or do you view America as a 1619 project? And of course, I'm not the only one to use that paradigm, but I come from a background that looks at America as the land of the free, home of the brave, and the shiny city on the hill. And we want to uphold those traditional American values. We want to be proud of of them. We want to proud America has been, what America is, what America can be. And there's some folks, I think, and a number of them here in Congress that look at America as a 1619 project. And of course, that's when the New York Times looked at the first data slave was brought to the U.S. and sort of it's this constant idea of apologizing for America or need to fundamentally change what America is. And sometimes it can be seen as kind of a radical Marxist project to reorganize what America is. But in any event, it's not the America that I know and love, and so working to celebrate that America of 1776 to fulfill the promise of the founders and in our constitutional structure, it really is about trying to get America back to the basics, and that's what we're working on here in Congress, and it's been fun to be part of. When we were actually just this morning, right before getting on this podcast with you guys, I was the speaker pro temp, getting to be the acting speaker of the House. That's always such an honor to get to do, to be up there with the gavel. I think if I'm an Article 1 guy in our Constitution, so I love Congress, and I think this precious republic that we have, there's no better symbolic place of it than being in that speaker's chair. So it was fun to get to do that this morning, and that's the kind of America I like to celebrate.
Beautiful. So we've seen this ideology that you described, the 1619 version of it, play out in higher education, K through 12. You're on the House Education Committee. You're looking at these issues. Tell us a little bit about how you're viewing them as a member of Congress. How you think higher education plays into this, and maybe what Congress's role could be or should be in countering these ideological trends.
Well, unfortunately, higher education has lost a lot of trust with the American people in the last decade, and particularly in the last 4 to 5 years. And I'm somebody that's a real fan of higher education. Obviously, I grew up in a college town, and when done right, higher education is a gem of America. It provides social mobility. It provides so much opportunity. It's the nexus of research and development combined with academia that innovates our economy. But when it's done wrong, and as it has been far too often, particularly in the last 5 years, it's so debilitating to the American project because it teaches class hate, it teaches Marxism, it teaches this woke ideology. And what I view really is the good work of Congress in this 119th Congress and working with the current presidential administration is really trying to root out as much of this woke ideology as possible. And it's things like there didn't ever used to be, when America was being built, these ideas of ideological diversity tests when people were just applying for a job. If you were going to be a professor of engineering, it was a question of what was your research and how good a professor of engineering you could be. In the last decade, they started these crazy diversity statements where you had to promise as part of just getting a job that you were going to advance this woke ideology. And it really has spread all through academia. And so currently with Congress, a lot of what we've been looking at is how that's impacted anti-Semitism, and that's been such a troubling trend in Congress. But just more generally, it's trying to push back and just say, hey, universities, get back to basics. Focus on the core values of what the job market wants and what traditionally universities have provided to American society. And I think we're making some real progress.
Yeah. So there is a critique. I'm a classical liberal, basically. I believe in the free expression of ideas, and you can be a classical liberal on the right, you can be a classical liberal on the center left. And there are some people in my community of classical liberals who worry, while they like the pushback against universities, they're worried that it's going to be replaced with an alternative ideological framework. In other words, they're trying to replace one illiberal ideology, which, as you're describing it, is sort of could be described as neo-Marxist or, oppressed oppressor, with another ideological framework that also allows little room for discourse and debate. What is your feeling about that? Do you share any of those concerns as well?
Well, I mean, I do in the abstract, in the theoretical sense, but show me in reality where that's happening. I mean, it's so skewed right now to the extreme far left that I think just having a modicum of balance or free expression, certainly they should be places for free expression of all types. But I don't think there's any sort of practical censorship in that sense that those classical liberals care about. I also consider myself classical liberal in that sense. I went to Washington State University for undergrad, studied economics and math, and then went to Harvard for my master's degree. In between, I spent a year. I'm a Catholic, and in the year between, I spent a year with the Jesuits in Mozambique as a volunteer, and I taught at Catholic University in Mozambique. And then I also taught when I was at Harvard. I was a teaching fellow in economics, and so I had this experience of three different universities in my early 20s. And what I really saw was. They were all very similar in the sense that they had opportunities for learning, expression, and academic inquiry, but they were very different in the ideology that they were surrounded by. And Harvard was, even at that time, this is in the early 2000s. It was fairly left wing then, and you had in Mozambique, which was probably the poorest country, almost the poorest country in the world at that time. It was only the second university. You had much less of a sense of victimization uh, and socialism than you did when I was at Harvard, which was then the richest university in the country, just in terms of the general ideology they sent. At that time, I was in the Republican Club. We used to call the Republican Club the phone booth club back in the early 2000s. Now I make that joke with young folks, and they're not sure what a phone booth is. But in any event, it's gone so much farther left, and I've had direct conversations with both the dean of the Kennedy School where I was and the president of Harvard. Actually, I hosted Harvard here on a reception for the Kennedy School last month because what I said to my fellow Republicans is, look, these institutions are important. We need to be involved. And so some of the process that needs to go on is not just shunning these institutions, but as conservatives or classical liberals to be re-engaged with them to make sure that the radical left just doesn't have a free run there. So in any event, to answer your question, of course, you want to celebrate the fundamental goodness of openness and inquiry and freedom across the board, but I don't think we're anywhere near being concerned that there's a different kind of ideology taking over.
Yeah, yeah. It's almost hard to imagine because these universities are peopled with a lot of ideologues and partisans and the like, and so even if the administration is using a very blunt instrument of reform, it's not likely to be able to create even then perfect ideological balance or let alone skew it in its own direction. It's about sort of opening up the conversation. And I want to ask you a little bit about K through 12 education. There were these hearings December 5th, 2023. I don't remember a lot of dates, but I certainly remember those. Maybe 2.5 months after October 7th. And they were really a wake-up call for America. I don't think that there's been many hearings in Congress that had that many eyeballs on them. And it caused a huge jolt to the system. And you had resignations from, that didn't immediately come out, but certainly started with those hearings. And I think people now realize that that higher education was trapped in an ideological bubble and it needed reform, and it was allowing these double standards to emerge and how it treated Jews in anti-Semitism compared to how it treated other forms of racism or how it treated other minorities. Yet today we've seen K through 12 education also go through something similar. And unlike college, everybody goes through a K through 12, or just about everybody goes through K through 12 education. Only a small percentage of kids go become humanities majors at Brown. So we have a lot of concerns about what's happening that a lot of people don't know. And I'm just wondering what you think Congress's role might be there and how we can sort of call attention to this problem.
Well, it's a little bit different than it is, I think, on the higher education space. Because, of course, because of the amount of federal dollars that go into higher education as a proportion of funding, there's probably more of a role for Congress. My view is if you look at the U.S., education has traditionally always been a local issue. if a group of pilgrims in Massachusetts wanted to organize their schools in one way, and then a group of folks in some other one of the colonies differently, that was up to them. As as Washington D.C. has continued to grow in consequence and power, education has become more federal, and of course, as society has become more politicized and more partisan, there have been certain activists that have, like they've done with all sorts of societies, seen the K through 12 project or their opportunities. Everybody knows a classroom where there's a teacher that has seen it as an ideological bully pulpit versus just teaching school. And I have 5 kids in public schools in Eastern Washington, and they've gotten a good education. I think but there are some of those concerns as well too. So I think the key to it is, what are our fundamentals? We want to have as much parental involvement and control as we can, and we want to have as much choice and opportunity in education as you can. And that's where I like things like tax credits for K through 12 education, or things that provide that diversity of choice. Ultimately, we are a big we're 350 million people in America, and we don't all have the same political views. And what you want is people to be able to have that opportunity to choose the kind of education that they want to have. And we have that in Eastern Washington. Obviously, we have a very left wing, very radical to some extent state superintendent of public administration, and we have a very left wing state legislature that has pushed issues like gender ideology, transgender ideology, and very early into the classroom. Our individual teachers have been good in working with me and my wife as parents, saying, "Hey, maybe you want to opt out of this educational section." Others parents in our situation have actually removed their kids from public schools, both because of the COVID lockdowns and just the ideological bent. And it's going to cause some fiscal issues for our public K through 12 in Washington State, because folks have voted with their feet. So again. What's the role of Congress? Well, I want to support educational choice. I want to support parental involvement. But we're still a republic of states, and we have to also realize that a lot of the decision making is made as close as possible to the local level.
I'm going to turn to Cliff in 1 second. I just want to brief follow up. You talked about a radical state superintendent, and we've seen things like ethnic studies and liberated ethnic studies in Washington. Do you have a role as a member of Congress from that state in dealing, like, flesh that out a little bit, because we're trying to figure this out. I mean, what are our points of leverage in a place like state of Washington, where you have I'm sure Seattle is the big fish there, and it probably fuels a lot of the politics at the state level. What do we do about that, and how do you function vis-a-vis those officials?
Well, I think insofar as on the transgendered issue, I think that's a human rights issue, and fairness for girls in sports. And so I think there's an appropriate nexus there with federal funding that goes into the state-based K through 12. And so I think you look at that as a carrot and stick issue on that. And but in general, one of the reasons I'm in Washington, D.C. is because I do believe we're a union of states, and I think we're out of constitutional balance. And I think one of the ways we're out of constitutional balance is Washington, D.C. in general has become way too much powerful in terms of the impact it has on the states. So I want to push authority and funding back to the state level, push it out of Washington, D.C. And part of that is you're going to have to accept that some states are going to be different, and you have to allow for that difference. And I don't think it was right when President Biden wanted to, or the Democrats under Obama wanted to try to make folks in rural Washington or Texas or Kansas live the same way as folks in urban San Francisco. I think we have to respect those differences. And so I think one is on the funding level. I think human rights issue of the females in sports is different. I also think we in Congress can just celebrate the goodness of America. And a lot of you're seeing the president do that. But again, as we come to the 250th anniversary of America, we should celebrate our history, learn from it, but be proud of it. And I always I think if you look at when hopefully you or your viewers have had the opportunity to come to Washington, D.C. But when you come to Washington, D.C., if you get the chance to visit the Capitol Rotunda, which is, if there's any place that's the center of expression of, essentially the Sistine Chapel of freedom of what it is to be an American, it's the Capitol Rotunda. And if you look at up the dome, you see a celebration of the Judeo-Christian roots of America and this expression of freedom. And if you look around the Capitol Dome, the paintings, the first four paintings in the Capitol Dome, there's eight, but the first four paintings are all a celebration of this. It's Columbus triumphantly arriving in the New World. It's De Soto crossing the Mississippi with a cross and the natives looking on. The pilgrims praying on the Mayflower, and then Sacagawea, Pocahontas being baptized a Christian. And then the other four paintings in the rotunda are about the formation of the Republic, independence from the British, and Declaration of Independence. But if you look at that, that's the American project at the center of what America is supposed to be. That is a very different America than some folks in Congress would like it to be. I don't think that's the America that Ilhan Omar or Pramila Jayapal necessarily want us to be, certainly from the religious and expansionist, standpoint. But so we need to celebrate, that history, be proud of what it is to be an American, while also respecting, these ideological differences at the local level.
Fantastic. Cliff, why don't you drill down a little bit on some of the legislation we're looking at?
Yeah, well, I was just thinking, you're talking a lot about, the goodness of America and the things that we have here. But of course, one thing that I've worked on a long time, and I know you care about, is the fact that, America's weak point is it's also its strong point. And that is, since we're a democratic republic, we can be influenced by, others with nefarious motives. And there's been a lot of influence campaigns by enemy and frenemy states. And I know that's something you've been working on at the university level, specifically with the Deterrent Act, although I know there's been other methods too. I just thought you might want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, you've seen foreign actors, nefarious foreign actors, abuse the openness of the American educational system, particularly at our universities, and try to use it to advance a nefarious agenda. And whether that's the Chinese Communist Party, which has been running large industrial scale espionage projects and some influence operations in our college campuses with things like their Confucius institutes, or more potentially nefarious activities from other countries that have ideological bents. And so, the key to all that, I think, is to have openness and sunshine, and that's what the Deterrent Act does. Currently, under federal law, states are required to disclose any financial arrangements over $250,000 with foreign entities, but it largely has been ignored, and under the Biden administration had been ignored. And so what my legislation does is tighten that up to a threshold of $50,000 for all countries except four particularly nefarious countries, and that's Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. And I think every American taxpayer should say, yeah, if you have an agreement with one of those countries, we want to know about it. What was pretty shocking to me was when we had some hearings on the bill, and subsequently, I remember having the chancellor from the University of California system before our committee, and he would not commit to just implementing the full disclosure of foreign engagements, even without my legislation. Should not require legislation from Congress to do this. And what was interesting is he said, I said, "Will you commit to it?" He said, "No." But then he said, "Well, I assure you, we've turned down a lot of foreign money." And I said, "Well, give me an example." He said, "Well, I can't do that because our donors don't want us to." And I said, "Well, if what are they hiding? Who are the countries that are coming to the University of California system? What do they want?" I mean, these are all issues that are important for the public to know about. These are publicly funded universities, so it is really important, and we'll continue to work on that Deterrent Act.
Well, yeah, you guys did a great job getting it through the House. You've got, I believe, was either all or all but one or two Republicans and a decent portion of Democrats. I think it was 30 something Democrats that won, I believe.
Yeah.
And that's great. I will say, to what you say in terms of the university's lack of or unwillingness to do this, even when it's theoretically still required by law already. It's just that there's not a good enforcement mechanism, and it doesn't require them to close enough. But one thing you might even, just in case you don't know, I thought it was very interesting at the last hearing you guys had with Georgetown University at there, which has gotten a lot of money from the Middle East. Qatar's chief lobbyist was sitting in the audience the entire time during the hearing, which was kind of
Congressman Jim Moran, right?
That's correct.
And former Congressman Jim Moran, right?
I'm not going to give away names, but I know someone personally that talked to him and said, "Hey, what are you doing here?" "Well, I'm just here to help." Well, yeah, it might be the fact that Georgetown's gotten more money from Qatar than just about any school in America, and I don't think the fact that Georgetown, teaches so many people that enter foreign service is an accident. It's a big problem. It's a big problem.
No doubt. It's been a problem for a long time. I spoke to the graduate class in foreign service at Georgetown, and it was about 10 people in the room, and I was stunned. There was one guy who was a former Marine who was in the foreign service school who was defending me, but to a person, otherwise they were ideologues, and it really scared me to think that those people, now it's been a few years, probably many of them are in the foreign service.
Yeah, I was impressed when you raise a really important issue. I know the my own experience working with Ambassador Ryan Crocker when we were in Baghdad. Of course, it was a war zone, very kinetic environment, and this was under the Bush administration. But Ambassador Crocker always really emphasized with us that if you wanted to. We were there to implement policy, and it was we worked for the executive branch, we worked for the President of the United States, and if you wanted to make policy, you needed to go the other end of Constitution Avenue and go up to Capitol Hill. But in the State Department, we were there to implement policy. And so, some of the issues isn't just the ideology of the folks there. It really is the administration that the American people end up, electing. And, some of the things that are really frustrating to me in foreign policy is when you see it take on the political overtones of the U.S. when there's, things like flying the gay pride flag in Pakistan or at the Vatican, which are nothing that has anything to do with actually advancing U.S. foreign policy goals. It's more of an expression of domestic political expression and intent there. How that feeds through to our universities, again with the Turn Act. We want the sunshine. On that issue. I think with respect to the Middle East and particularly Qatar, we just didn't know what it needs to be defended. It needs to be opened up, and it needs to be looked at. My biggest issue with Qatar specifically is their support for Al Jazeera, which is a kind of a information operation very anti-American information operation program, and we need to take a look at that and how it impacts things. But regarding Georgetown's specific role in that, I would say at the least Georgetown at that hearing at least committed to full openness. So we'll see. Maybe your institution can follow up and make sure that they're doing that as we continue to work on getting the Deterrent Act out of the Senate.
Yeah, no.
I'm reluctant to ask you this question, but sometimes I'm shocked at the degree to which Qatar has infiltrated our politics, and I think it's a bipartisan affair, quite frankly. I mean, I've seen some colleagues, I'm not going to name names, who have seemed like they're shilling for the country, on various hearings. And do you have any insights you want to add there? Like, what do you see the politics of Qatar in America today?
Well, I think we have to recognize that, what lens you're looking at through. I mean, we have an important security arrangement with Qatar. I mean, Al Udeid Air Base is a massive security asset that we have in the middle of a very dangerous part of the world. And, the Qataris essentially cover the costs of that base. Now, for them, it provides certainly an important layer of security vis-a-vis the Iranians, but also has a lot of benefits to the U.S. Qatar also has done things like share security, even with Israel in the Middle East, versus the Iranians. So it's maybe a little deeper and more complex issue than I think if you're just looking at Qatar through the lens of Al Jazeera and their support. Than they have. They also have tremendous amounts of natural gas and other issues. So, but they have to look at like other actor. I think also sometimes with Qatar, there's a difference between the Qatari government and certain elements in the Qatari government, and there are just general Qatari folks. Certainly, there are Islamists in Qatar, like there are in the rest of the Gulf, and they have some deep pockets in those trades. So it's not a monolith when you talk about Qatar, and I think sometimes when you see them lobbying Congress, it's amongst those things. We have, and again, I'm not part of the administration, certainly was not part of the Biden administration. I'm just a member of Congress, but, Qatar also has been a place, you look at, well, why do they have Hamas there? Or why do they have this? Well, we've used Qatar as a place where you can have conversations. Right now, there's still a lot of terrorists that are active in Afghanistan. And even though we're not in Afghanistan, we have to have ways to communicate with that country. We run counterterrorism operations in Afghanistan, and sometimes Qatar is the beachhead for that, or the forum for having those discussions. So it does serve kind of a Star Wars cantina role of Middle East policy, and have some benefits around that deeper than just the money and the funding on that issue.
Well, Congressman, it's been 30 minutes, and I want to respect your time. I could go on and on. I had a lot of questions, and I know we'll have an opportunity to continue the conversation at one point. First of all, I just want to thank you for your leadership on these issues. Thank you for being a supporter of the Jewish community at a rough time. It means a lot to us, and also for being a strong supporter of the U.S. Israel relationship. Really appreciate that.
Well, thank you. Look, that relationship is so important, and of everything that's happened since October 7th, the one that is the most frustrating to me is the lack of sympathy in so many segments of American society for the American victims of October 7th. The lack of yellow ribbons, the idea that somehow these folks are less American because they're Jewish. And, I was just in Israel a couple weeks ago and had the chance to be down at the Nova site. And it's horrific what happened there. If there were drug gangs or terrorist gangs in Tijuana, Mexico, firing rockets towards San Diego and kidnapping grandmothers and raping women and putting them in tunnels, the American people would not stand for that. And so Hamas does need to be rooted out, and it is so important to have an ally like Israel in the Middle East, and we need to build on it with groups like the UAE and build on the Abraham Accords, and we'll continue to do that. So we'll continue to make sure that they're supported in Congress, and that we'll continue to make sure that the idea of America is the 1776 project continues to be celebrated in our schools and across site. And just really appreciate you guys inviting me to be on your program, and I look forward to the next time as well.
Thanks a million. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.